The gold is buried in the part of yourself you hate. Carl Jung observed that the very thing we cannot stand to look at in ourselves is often not garbage at all, but treasure we buried alive. So let's sit with that tonight, by the fire, and let it work on us slowly, Pratinks. As Jung wrote in Ion, no tree, it is said, can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. And I want you to notice what that image actually claims. It does not say the roots are shameful. It does not say they should be cut away. It says the height of the thing depends entirely on the depth of the thing. The very reach toward light is paid for, root by root, in soil that never sees the sun. So if some part of you lives down in that dark soil, hated, avoided, called by an ugly name in your own private language, it may not be a flaw in the tree. It may be the very reason the tree can grow at all. Here is what nobody tells you when they teach you to face your shadow. They make it sound like inspection, like standing over a pit with a flashlight, looking for something rotten. And yes, some of what is down there is rotten. Jealousy, cruelty, the wish to see someone fail, that is real, and I am not going to pretend otherwise tonight. But Jung kept insisting on something stranger. That mixed in with the rot is gold. Actual ore, capacities and instincts and appetites you needed as a child, and were told, gently or not so gently, to put away. And because a child cannot sort nuance, the whole bundle got carried down into the same dark room, the ugly and the valuable together, and you sealed the door and called the room disgusting, so you would never have to open it again. You built a subscribe habit for a reason once, the wish to keep learning, to keep company with an idea past a single evening. So if this kind of thinking is useful to you, subscribing simply means tomorrow's teaching finds you again without you having to go looking for it. The first key is, hatred of a trait in yourself is not proof that the trait is worthless. Hatred is often proof that the trait is powerful and was never given permission. Think for a moment about something in you that you genuinely cannot stand. Not a small habit, like leaving dishes in the sink, but a deeper thing. Maybe your own bluntness, maybe your hunger for attention, maybe a coldness that shows up when someone needs you too much. You have probably spent years managing that trait, apologizing for it, building whole routines to keep it from showing. And here is the strange part. The energy you spend suppressing it is roughly equal to the energy the trait itself would carry if it were allowed to move. That is not an accident. Jung taught that the psyche does not manufacture worthless material, and then, separately, waste enormous effort hiding it. The effort and the value are the same size, because they are the same thing, seen from two directions. The bluntness you hate may be undeveloped honesty. The hunger for attention may be undeveloped aliveness. The coldness may be undeveloped self-protection that a child needed, and an adult still needs sometimes. None of this excuses harm, and we will come back to that carefully, but it does mean the first move is not to scrub the trait out. It is to ask what it was trying to do for you before anyone taught you it was shameful. Imagine a man who prides himself on being endlessly agreeable and who feels a hot flash of disgust whenever he notices himself being stubborn. If you asked him to just relax and let the stubbornness speak once, plainly, without apology, he would likely find underneath it something closer to conviction, a refusal to be moved by every passing pressure, which is not a character flaw at all. It is a spine. So tonight, without judging yourself for it, just notice the trait you are quickest to condemn and hold the question loosely. What was this trying to protect or provide before it got called ugly? So let me speak a resolution here, and I invite you to hold it with me. I will ask what my worst trait was trying to protect. I will ask what my worst trait was trying to protect. The second key is, envy is not a sin to be managed, it is a map, and most people spend their whole lives running from the map instead of reading it. Jung noted that what we cannot face in ourselves, we tend to meet outside ourselves first, and envy is one of the clearest instances of that pattern. When you feel that particular hot tightening in the chest, watching someone else do a thing with ease. When you catch yourself minimizing their achievement. When you hear yourself say, Oh, it's not that impressive, really. Pay attention, because that tightness is rarely about them at all. It is a signal that something in you recognizes a capacity it has not been allowed to use. Envy has a very specific emotional texture. It is not the same as admiration. Admiration feels warm and expansive. Envy feels tight and slightly ashamed of itself, and that tightness is the tell. It means the capacity you are looking at in them is not foreign to you. It is familiar, uncomfortably familiar, like recognizing your own coat on someone else's shoulders. Imagine a woman who feels a small flash of irritation every time a friend speaks bluntly in a meeting and is respected for it, rather than punished. If she is honest, that irritation is not really about the friend's manners. It is about the years she spent learning that speaking plainly gets you disliked. And here the friend is, disproving the very rule she built her whole persona around. Of course it stings. It is not jealousy of the friend. It is grief for the version of herself she shelved. This is why Jung said, the encounter with the shadow is at first the meeting with one's own unlived possibility disguised as someone else's success. The emotional key here matters enormously, and I want to be precise about it because it is easy to get this wrong. Envy is a map, but rage is not the same signal. Rage more often points outward, toward an actual boundary crossed, a real harm done. We are not saying every angry reaction is secretly jealousy in disguise. That would be a cruel and dishonest simplification. What we are saying is narrower and more useful. When the feeling is that particular tight, slightly embarrassed envy, the kind you'd rather not admit even to yourself, that specific feeling is the compass needle, and it points toward gold. So this week, when you catch even a flicker of envy, instead of shaming yourself for feeling it, try writing down exactly what quality you were envying, not the outcome, not the money or the promotion or the applause, but the actual trait underneath it, their ease, their directness, their willingness to disappoint people. That trait is the ore sample, and it belongs to you as much as it belongs to them. So, here is a resolution to speak. I will read my envy as a map, not a shame. I will read my envy as a map, not a shame. The third key is, somewhere back in your history, there was a version of you who was told, in one way or another, that they were too much, and that moment did not destroy the gold, it only buried it. Imagine a child who laughs too loudly, who asks too many questions, who cries too easily, who wants too much attention, who has too many opinions for someone that age. And imagine the household response, not necessarily cruel, often just tired. A parent saying quiet down, a teacher saying stop showing off, a sibling rolling their eyes. None of this needs to be dramatic abuse to do its work. Small repeated signals are enough, because a child's whole survival depends on belonging to the group raising them. So the child does something efficient. They do not simply stop the behavior, they learn to stop being the kind of person who would do it. The loudness gets folded away. The hunger for attention gets renamed vanity and locked up. The too many opinions gets renamed difficult and gets quieted. And by adulthood they have often forgotten the trait ever belonged to them. They only remember the shame that replaced it. This is what Jung meant when he wrote that the shadow is not simply evil, it is that which is not wholly bad. Precisely because it so often began as something natural, entirely appropriate to a child's needs, that got condemned by an environment that could not hold it. Now picture that same person decades later, watching a friend's child laugh too loudly at something silly, and feeling, before any thought arrives, a small flinch, a reflex to say quiet down, before the words even form. That reflex came from the exact same buried room. The adult is not really annoyed at the child. The adult is guarding the door that was sealed on their own behalf long ago. And this is how the burial perpetuates itself across a whole life without a single new decision ever being made. You inherit a rule, you enforce it on yourself, and then, without noticing, you begin enforcing it on the world too. So now meet an adult who is loud without apology, who asks for attention without flinching, and something in you recoils, not because they are doing anything wrong, But because they are doing the very thing you were punished for doing, and watching them do it unpunished is almost unbearable, there is a particular ache underneath this recoil, worth naming carefully. It is a kind of homesickness, not for a place, but for a version of yourself you were never allowed to finish becoming. That homesickness is a legitimate signal, and I want to be careful here. We are not saying every childhood trait should have stayed exactly as it was. Some tempering is simply what growing up requires. But tempering and burial are not the same operation. Tempering shapes a trait so it can live well alongside other people. Burial erases the trait and replaces it with shame. And most of us, if we are honest, received far more burial than tempering, because burial is faster, and tired households reach for what is fast. So this week, sit with one memory, just one, where you were told plainly or quietly that a part of you was too much. Picture the room it happened in. Hear the words if you can still recall them. And instead of reliving the shame, ask what that part of you actually wanted to do before the door got shut. So let me speak this quietly. I will grieve the child who was told they were too much. I will grieve the child who was told they were too much. The fourth key is, the gold does not come in only one shape, and it helps to know the different forms it tends to take, because most people go looking for treasure, expecting one variety, and miss the other three entirely. The first kind is talent, a capacity you had early and were discouraged from using. Maybe you were quick with words and got called a smart aleck. Maybe you drew constantly and were told to focus on something practical. The talent did not vanish. It went underground and usually resurfaces, disguised as a hobby you feel slightly guilty about enjoying. The second kind is appetite, a plain desire you were taught to be ashamed of, wanting rest, wanting recognition, wanting more out of a room or a conversation than seemed polite. Appetite buried long enough turns into either compulsive overindulgence or a numbness where you genuinely cannot tell what you want anymore. The third kind is voice, the willingness to say the true thing plainly. This one gets buried especially in households that prized harmony over honesty, and it resurfaces later as either total silence or sudden eruptions that surprise even you. Because a voice denied its ordinary use does not disappear, it pressurizes. The fourth kind is freedom, the simple capacity to act without needing everyone's approval first. This gets buried in people praised heavily for being good, since goodness, in many households, quietly means compliance, until the adult cannot locate their own preference inside a room full of other people's preferences. Now consider how these show up in an ordinary week. Imagine a woman handed a project 2 sizes too big, and something in her wants to say plainly, "I cannot do this alone." That is voice asking to be used and appetite asking to be honored. But instead she smiles, says of course, and spends the weekend exhausted, telling herself she is simply dependable. Dependable is the polite word the persona uses for a grave where voice and appetite got buried together. Or imagine a man who used to paint as a boy, genuinely gifted, told firmly that art does not pay rent, and now, decades later, stands in a museum feeling a tightness behind his eyes he cannot explain. That tightness is talent, still alive down there, still hoping to be let out for even an hour, or a young man praised constantly for being agreeable, who now, at 30, cannot decide what restaurant he wants without polling 3 friends first. That is freedom, buried under so many years of earned approval that its own voice has gone nearly silent. Here is why this matters practically. When you go looking inside your own shadow, expecting only cruelty, you often walk past these 4 kinds of gold because they don't look like treasure. They look like the very things you've spent your adult life trying not to be. Too opinionated, too hungry, too loud, too independent. And notice these 4 rarely stay separated in real life. The woman who buries her voice often buries her appetite alongside it, because asking for help is itself a form of wanting. So when you go looking, do not expect one tidy labeled trait. Expect them tangled together, the way real roots tangle underground, all reaching the same direction, toward a light they were never allowed to reach. This is delicate work, because the aim is never to swing wildly the other direction, becoming reckless with talent, gluttonous with appetite, cruel with voice, careless with freedom. The aim, and Jung was careful about this, is integration, the trait rejoining conscious life at a manageable size, not a flood. So this week, hold those 4 words lightly as a checklist: talent, appetite, voice, freedom, and ask which one you buried the deepest, and which one you are still calling by some safer, smaller name. So speak this with me. I will name which kind of gold I buried the deepest. I will name which kind of gold I buried the deepest. The 5th key is the one where the lens turns all the way around and lands on you specifically. Because it has been fairly comfortable so far to talk about children in general and traits in general. And now it is time to ask plainly, what have you personally been calling ugly in yourself for so long that you no longer question the label? Think of the word you use, privately, in the voice you keep just for yourself. When this trait shows up, maybe the word is selfish, maybe it is cold, maybe it is dramatic, maybe it is intense. Notice that these are almost never neutral descriptions. They are verdicts, handed down once by someone with authority over you, and repeated ever since, as if they were simply facts about your nature. Jung wrote that the shadow, whatever else it contains, is not wholly bad, and he meant that as a clinical observation, not a comforting slogan. If you actually examine the disowned material, rather than flinching from it, you typically find it is mixed. Some genuinely needs restraint, some is pure undeveloped strength, fused together so long ago you have never separated the two. Let me put a face on this. Imagine a woman in her mid-30s, sitting in a meeting, watching a colleague present an idea she knows will not work. For one full second, the true sentence forms in her mind, and then something older than the meeting reaches up and takes it back. She says instead, "That's interesting. Maybe we could also consider," and the room moves on. Later that night, she does not think, "I was diplomatic today." She thinks, "I am such a coward." Notice the word, not cautious, not tactful, coward. That word did not arrive today, it arrived decades ago, in a house where a sharp observation from a child was treated as a small emergency. So she learned early to keep the accurate thought and the spoken thought separate, calling the gap prudence when it serves her and cowardice when it does not. But she has never once asked what that withheld sentence was actually made of. Was it cruelty dressed as honesty, or simply clear sight doing exactly what clear sight is for? This is the question Jung kept asking, underneath every case. Not is this trait good or bad, but what is it for, and what did it once do for you, before anyone attached a verdict to it. So name the word you use against yourself, the one you would never say aloud in a job interview or on a first date, the one that makes you apologize before anyone has even complained, and ask a second question underneath it. Who first called this ugly? A parent exhausted at the end of a long day, a teacher who needed a quiet classroom more than an honest one, a culture that prizes composure over need. Whoever it was, they were speaking from their own limits, not some cosmic verdict on your worth. A tired parent does not hand down eternal truths, they hand down whatever gets them through the evening, and a child cannot tell the difference between a verdict born of exhaustion and one born of wisdom, so the child keeps both, filed under the same heading, and carries that heading into every room for the rest of their life. Once you separate the trait from the verdict, something practical opens, because now you can ask what small, controlled amount of it your life actually needs right now, not unleashed, just restored to circulation. The woman in the meeting does not need to become someone who says every sharp thing that crosses her mind. That would simply trade cowardice for cruelty. What she needs is smaller, one honest sentence, chosen carefully, spoken once, then watched, not controlled, watched. Does the room actually collapse, or does something survivable happen instead? An awkward pause, followed by a conversation more useful than the polite one would have been. This is how a person slowly discovers that the word used against themselves for 30 years was never a fact. It was a policy adopted young, under conditions that no longer apply, and policies, unlike facts, can be revised. So this week, do exactly what she eventually did. Name the word you use against yourself, and instead of arguing with it or defending against it all at once, ask what it was trying to give you before it got condemned. Ask it quietly, the way you would ask an old friend why they left without saying goodbye. So let me speak this resolution now. I will separate my worst word from my actual worth. I will separate my worst word from my actual worth. The sixth key is about how you actually go get the gold once you know roughly where it is buried. Because knowing the theory changes very little on its own, and here Jung was unusually practical for someone so often accused of mysticism. He did not advise a dramatic confrontation, a single cathartic night where the whole shadow gets marched into the light and thanked for its service. He advised something slower, reclamation by grams, a small amount at a time, deliberately, and there is an account reported by Robert Johnson, who trained closely within this tradition, as Robert Johnson recalled, that some clinicians estimated the shadow's contents could run as much as 90% gold, with only a smaller portion genuinely needing restraint. I offer that figure with its proper hedge, a reported estimate, not a measured law of the psyche, but even loosely held, it reorients the task, because most people brace for mostly rot, when in fact, looked at closely rather than flinched away from, there is usually far more usable material than horror. Imagine a woman managing a small team, who has spent 15 years perfecting a gentle, accommodating tone in every meeting, because plain speech once got her labeled harsh. One Thursday, a colleague proposes a plan she knows will fail, and instead of her usual soft redirection, she tries 1 gram. She says plainly, "I don't think that will work." Notice what she does not do. She does not unload 15 years of buried directness in one sitting. She offers a single sentence, and then she watches, not to control what happens next, but to gather honest data. Does the room go cold? Or does something smaller and survivable happen? A short pause, a nod, the meeting simply moving forward. This is the entire method. One small dose, tried in a real setting, checked without flinching. And this is exactly where the caution has to stay attached, because reclaiming gold is never the same operation as excusing harm. If the buried trait, once given room, tends toward cruelty rather than honesty, toward using people rather than being honest with them, that portion needs real restraint, not celebration. Jung was never naive about this. The shadow holds ore and slag mixed in the same dark seam, which is exactly why the gram-sized experiment matters. A small dose tried carefully tells you plainly which kind of material you are holding. Gold integrates, and something in your life quietly grows more spacious. The room does not collapse. The relationship does not end. You simply have a little more room than last week. Rot, unleashed even a little, tends to leave a mark you cannot explain away. Someone is hurt. Something breaks. So let the small experiments be the judge, rather than deciding in advance out of fear. This is slower than any of us would like. There is no single evening where the shadow gets sorted once and for all. Only this week's gram, and next week's, tried in an ordinary setting, watched with attention that does not flinch from either outcome. Over months, not overnight, something shifts. The trait you hated longest stops feeling like an intruder and starts feeling like a tool you are learning to hold well. The bluntness becomes clarity others come to rely on. The hunger becomes an honest appetite instead of a hidden shame. The coldness becomes the plain capacity to say no, without your whole sense of self collapsing. None of this erases the years the gold spent buried, waiting without complaint, but it means those years were not wasted. They were the depth the roots needed before anything could grow toward light. So tonight, pick 1 gram, one small controlled dose of the trait you have hated longest. Find one ordinary low-stakes place this week to try it honestly, and simply watch. So speak this last resolution with me. I will reclaim my gold in grams, patiently, not in a flood. I will reclaim my gold in grams, patiently, not in a flood. Here is the whole picture. Hatred of a trait often marks its power, rather than its worthlessness. Envy is a map toward capacities you have not yet let yourself use. The child who was called too much did not lose the gold, only the permission to use it. The gold takes at least 4 shapes: talent, appetite, voice, and freedom. The word you use against yourself is a verdict from someone else's limits, not a fact about your worth. And the way home is not a flood, but a patient reclamation, gram by gram, checked honestly against what actually happens when you try it. The fire is low now, and the room is a little warmer than it was an hour ago, not because the dark has gone anywhere, but because you have stopped being quite so afraid of what is buried in it. Face it. So if you have been calling some part of yourself ugly for years, consider tonight that you may simply have been standing on top of your own buried gold, mistaking the weight of the earth for the worthlessness of what it covers.